My Latina neighbor's plumbing failed. She used mine and never left. The day Camila Reyes knocked on my door at 3 in the morning, water cascading down her fire escape stairs like a miniature waterfall, I had no idea that this emergency would become the beginning of everything I'd been missing in my life. She stood there in an oversized Princeton sweatshirt and flannel pants, her long dark hair soaking wet, her brown eyes wide with panic and embarrassment, and all I could think was how unfair it was that someone could look that beautiful in the middle of a plumbing disaster. I'd been living alone in my Seattle apartment for 2 years, ever since my last relationship had ended in the kind of quiet, painful dissolution that leaves you wondering if you'll ever feel anything again. My days had become a monotonous rhythm of working from home as a freelance graphic designer, ordering takeout, and convincing myself that solitude was the same thing as independence. I'd noticed Camila when she moved in 3 months earlier, of course. Everyone in the building had noticed her. She had this energy that seemed to light up the hallway, always greeting people with a warm smile, her accent wrapping around English words like a melody. But I'd kept my distance, perfecting the art of the polite nod in the brief hallway, conversation that never went deeper than commenting on the weather. That night, though, distance became impossible. Camila explained in rushed, apologetic sentences that a pipe had burst in her bathroom, that water was flooding her entire apartment, that the emergency maintenance line wasn't answering, and that she desperately needed to use my shower before an important presentation she had to give at the hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. I ushered her in without hesitation, showing her to my bathroom while I called the building's emergency number myself, using the particular tone of irritation that sometimes gets faster results. While she showered, I could hear her softly cursing in Spanish, and something about those muffled sounds of frustration made her seem more real, more human, more accessible than the graceful woman I'd observed from afar. When she emerged 20 minutes later, her hair wrapped in one of my towels, wearing the spare clothes she'd managed to grab from her flooded apartment, we sat in my kitchen drinking coffee while we waited for maintenance to arrive. That's when the real conversation began. Camila told me about her journey from Guatemala, about leaving behind her family to pursue her nursing degree, about the weight of being the first in her family to achieve this level of education, and how that pride mixed with guilt in ways that sometimes kept her awake at night. She spoke about her patients, the children who trusted her with their fears, and how she carried pieces of their stories home with her every evening. I found myself opening up in return, sharing things I hadn't told anyone in years, about my own fears of mediocrity, about how I'd chosen safety over passion so many times that I'd forgotten what wanting something felt like. The maintenance crew didn't arrive until dawn, and by then, Camila and I had talked through the entire night. When they finally assessed her apartment, the news was worse than expected. The burst pipe had caused extensive damage, and her unit would be uninhabitable for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. The building offered to put her up in a hotel, but I heard myself speaking before I'd fully thought it through, telling her she could stay with me, that I had a spare bedroom that I barely used, that it would be no trouble at all. The look of relief and gratitude on her face made my chest feel tight in a way I didn't quite understand yet. Those first few days of cohabitation were awkward, in the way that sharing space with a stranger always is, both of us overly polite, apologizing for every small inconvenience, moving around each other like carefully choreographed dancers. But gradually we found our rhythm. Camila would wake up early for her shifts at the hospital, and I'd already have coffee brewing, learning quickly that she liked hers with cinnamon and a touch of vanilla. She'd come home exhausted, and I'd have music playing softly, having discovered that she loved old boleros that reminded her of her grandmother. We'd cook dinner together, her teaching me recipes from her childhood while I introduced her to my strange fusion experiments that usually turned out better than they had any right to. It was in those quiet domestic moments that I began to fall for her. Though I fought against the feeling with everything I had, I'd watch her laugh at some silly joke while we chopped vegetables, or catch her humming while she folded laundry, and I'd feel this overwhelming tenderness that terrified me. I'd been hurt before, had built these careful walls around my heart, and here was this woman who was dismantling them without even trying, just by being authentically herself. I told myself it was just proximity, just the forced intimacy of sharing space, that it would pass once she moved back to her own apartment. But deep down I knew I was lying to myself. Camilla never talked about her own romantic life, and I was too afraid to ask, constructing elaborate scenarios in my mind where she was straight, or already in a relationship, or simply not interested in me that way. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read, and my heart would race with possibility before I'd shut down those thoughts, reminding myself not to project my feelings onto someone who was just being kind, just being grateful for a place to stay. The 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4, as the repairs to her apartment revealed more problems. Each delay another gift of time I cherished and dreaded in equal measure. One evening, about 5 weeks into our arrangement, Camilla came home from a particularly difficult shift. One of her young patients had taken a turn for the worse, and I could see the weight of it in the slope of her shoulders, the exhaustion in her eyes. We sat on my couch, and she leaned her head on my shoulder in a gesture that felt both natural and electric. She talked about the unfairness of children suffering, about feeling helpless despite all her training, about the emotional toll of caring so deeply. I wrapped my arm around her, offering comfort the only way I knew how, and we sat like that for a long time, her breathing eventually evening out as some of the tension left her body. Then she looked up at me, her face inches from mine, and I saw something in her eyes that made my breath catch. She whispered my name like a question, and I understood that this moment was a crossroads, that what happened next would change everything. I could pretend I didn't understand, could pull away and preserve the safe distance I'd been maintaining, or I could be brave for once in my life and reach for what I wanted. I chose bravery. I leaned in and kissed her, soft and tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull back. Instead, she kissed me back, her hand coming up to cup my face, and it felt like every cliché I'd ever rolled my eyes at, like fireworks and coming home and finding something I hadn't known I'd been searching for. We pulled apart, both slightly breathless, and Camilla laughed, a sound of pure joy that made me smile even through my nervousness. She told me she'd been hoping I'd do that for weeks, that she'd been trying to figure out if I was interested, if I was queer, if there was any chance I might feel the same way she did. We talked through the night again, but this time curled up together, sharing our histories and our hopes, our fears about rushing into something, our excitement about where this might lead. She told me about her first love back in Guatemala, about the pain of hiding who she was from her conservative family, about the freedom and loneliness of building a life in a new country where she could be herself but felt disconnected from her roots. I shared my own journey of coming out, the relationships that had taught me what I wanted and what I wouldn't settle for, the ways I'd closed myself off after being hurt. We acknowledged that this had started under unusual circumstances, that living together before even dating was backwards and potentially complicated, but neither of us wanted to pretend we didn't feel this connection. We decided to be intentional about it, to date properly even while sharing the same space, to give this the attention and care it deserved. The next few weeks were like living in a dream I was afraid I'd wake up from. We'd have breakfast together, then Camilla would leave for work while I'd lose myself in design projects, counting the hours until she'd come home. We'd go on actual dates, exploring the city together, Camilla showing me her favorite hidden spots that I'd somehow never discovered, despite living in Seattle for years. We'd hold hands walking through Pike Place Market, steal kisses in quiet corners of art museums, dance in my living room to her grandmother's favorite songs. She introduced me to her colleagues at a hospital fundraiser, her hand proud and possessive on my lower back, and I felt a surge of gratitude for her courage in being openly affectionate, in claiming our relationship in spaces where not everyone would understand or approve. But we also faced the reality that her apartment would eventually be ready, that this cocoon we'd built together had an expiration date. When the building manager finally called to say her unit was repaired and ready for move-in, we both fell silent. Camilla's lease was paid through the end of the year, and practically speaking, it made sense for her to move back, to have her own space again. But the thought of her leaving, of my apartment returning to its previous emptiness, felt unbearable. We spent that evening talking about what we wanted, being honest about our fears of moving too fast, of the relationship feeling different once we weren't in this forced proximity, of losing what we'd found. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever felt the fear and exhilaration of opening yourself up to love again, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that celebrate love in all its beautiful forms. And it means everything to know these narratives resonate with you. Camilla made the decision with characteristic directness. She told me she didn't want to move back, that these weeks with me had been the happiest she'd been since leaving Guatemala, that she was tired of being careful and practical when her heart was telling her something completely different. She acknowledged the risks, the speed at which we were moving, but said that sometimes you just know when something is right, and this felt right in a way nothing else ever had. She asked if I wanted her to stay, really stay, not just as a temporary guest, but as a partner building a life together. I thought about all the ways I'd played it safe, all the times I'd chosen protection over possibility, all the years I'd spent in careful solitude, convincing myself it was enough. And then I looked at this incredible woman who'd literally flooded into my life, who'd brought color and warmth and music and laughter into my quiet existence, who'd seen all my carefully constructed walls and loved me not despite them but through them. I told her yes, that I wanted her to stay, that I wanted to build something real and lasting, that I was ready to be brave with her. We spent that weekend moving her belongings into my apartment. Our apartment now, blending our lives in tangible ways, her colorful textiles and family photos mixed with my minimalist aesthetic, creating something uniquely ours. Her spices filled my previously sparse kitchen cabinets, her medical journals stacked next to my design books, her laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. We hung her grandmother's rosary next to my collection of vintage concert posters, symbolic of the way we were learning to honor both our histories while creating something new together. Before we conclude, I want to ask you something special. In the comments below, share a moment when unexpected circumstances brought something beautiful into your life. Whether it was love, friendship, or a new beginning, your stories inspire others who might be waiting for their own moment of transformation. Let's build a community of hope together. Months later, when people ask how we met, Camila loves to tell them that her plumbing failed and she used mine and never left. Watching their faces shift from confusion to understanding to delight, it's become our story. The one we'll probably tell our children someday if we're blessed with them, about how sometimes the worst moments crack us open in exactly the way we need. How disaster can be the doorway to everything you didn't know you were missing. Her family eventually visited from Guatemala, and while there was initial tension about her relationship with a woman, her mother eventually softened, won over by seeing her daughter's genuine happiness, by the way we cared for each other, by the life we'd built together. I still work from home, but now I work in a space filled with another person's presence, with the knowledge that someone will come through the door at the end of the day, that I'm building something with someone, rather than just building a life around my own solitude. Camila still saves pieces of her patient's stories in her heart, but now she has someone to share that burden with, someone to remind her that caring deeply is a strength, not a weakness. We've learned each other's rhythms, the way she needs quiet after difficult shifts, the way I need reassurance when my insecurities surface, the way we both need to be reminded that we're worthy of this love we've found. The truth is, Camilla's plumbing didn't really fail that night. What failed was all my careful distance, my protective isolation, my conviction that keeping people at arm's length was the same as keeping myself safe. What failed was the story I'd been telling myself about who I was and what I deserved. And in that failure, in that 3 a.m. knock on my door from a desperate woman with water-soaked hair and hopeful eyes, I found everything I'd been too afraid to reach for. Sometimes the pipes have to burst for the water to flow in new directions, for life to flood into the carefully controlled spaces we've created, for love to seep through all the cracks we've tried so hard to seal. And sometimes, the person who shows up at your door asking to use your shower ends up making your whole world feel like home.